when I was younger, I was like, I don't want some guy in the room tell me about my songs. Now that I'm, less insecure, the idea of having somebody that you trust and respect really giving you quality feedback becomes really valuable, And ironically, I needed feedback a lot more when I was young and insecure, probably, than I do now.
Matt, it is great to see you again, and finally, Gruesome is back. It's been a roller coaster, but knowing that this one in particular is special for a lot of reasons, how do you feel right now?
I mean, I'm really glad that it's finally happening. I mean, we finished the record last August, and then we were working with Travis for the cover art last fall, and it's just I felt a lot of relief after recording the album, but then so much time went by. I was like, oh God, is this ever going to end? So it feels really good to be done, to not have this thing sort of hanging over us. I think it's really kind of rekindled, at least for me, it's rekindled my enthusiasm for doing this project and for moving forward. And it's been really nice to see, the feedback we've gotten so far has been really positive. So that's gratifying, because it would really suck if after all this time and all the fucking hand wringing and work that we put into this album, if people are like, it's okay, I'd be like, shit.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's dive a little deeper into that. And just real quick I am gonna assume that most people that are watching this right now have some level of understanding of what Gruesome is all about. But, just real quick for the people that are newer to the band, that are finding you through this channel, is it okay if I recap this whole thing as, for people that already have way too much stuff on their plate, decide to make a band that keeps the spirit of death alive, if you will. You're obviously your own band and you make original material, but as you described yourself as a death deifying band, it's in the DNA. Like, this is, I mean, I wouldn't call this a glorified cover band or tribute band, but this is a tribute of some sorts. Is that a fair description?
It is. I always try to explain it to people like, we're a tribute band that writes our own songs. And usually people are like, huh? And I'm like, yeah, that's about the correct response. And because all four of us are really busy and stuff, when we started doing this, 10 years ago now, I personally didn't really think it was that we'd still be talking about this in 10 years. I figured we would do one record, and some people would think it was kind of fun, and some people would never hear about it, and maybe we might play a festival gig like Maryland or something just for a laugh. And it wasn't that we didn't take what we were doing seriously, because we're all really big fans of death, and we have a lot of respect and admiration for the source material, but I did not take the project seriously, and that ended up kind of biting me in the ass. I remember telling my wife, I was like, oh yeah, she's like, oh really, another band? Like, really? And I was like, oh, we'll never play live, this is nothing. And yeah, whoops.
So we're at the point where you're basically doing your take on Death's Human album, which is not, I mean, which, as far as classics go and influential albums go, is quite out there. And it is really cool that you guys kind of go, like, what if there was like a second piece to that, or what if Death made more records? So it's really cool to get that original new music. It's kind of like people that write new books in the world of Tolkien or make music in the, like, stuff like that, right?
exactly.
But then tackling an album like that, I mean, how often were you like just asking yourself, like, why did we do this during this process? Because you must feel a ton of pressure as a fan, first and foremost, that you have to live up to a bar. And great, it worked out well, and reviews are great, and I've had already a lot of fun listening to the album, and we'll go into that in a second. But there must be a huge amount of pressure on you guys when you're doing this.
Yeah, and I think with this album in particular, that was one of the sort of stumbling blocks, because we started working on this record kind of like 3 separate times where we're like, okay, guys, we're really going to get to work. And, you know, part of it was knowing that there's an expectation, because I feel like with Death fans, there's 3 groups, right? There's one that likes everything. There's one that only likes the old stuff. And then there's one that only likes the later stuff. And Human is sort of the album where the Venn diagram intersects. And a lot of people really like it. And it's also an album that it means a lot to a lot of people, because it's so, for its time, it's really musically advanced. It's certainly out of the wheelhouse of stuff that I usually do in death metal. So, there was a real feeling of having to step up our game. And, we kind of took it like almost, this is like our first album, because there's going to be a group of people who are probably major death fans who are like, oh yeah, anybody can make a record that sounds like Scream Bloody Gore. That shit's not for me. I would beg to differ. But anyway, that might be their take, or that might have been their take in the past. And then they're like, oh, they're finally doing a record that I'm interested in. Maybe I'll come back around and check it out. So it's like, it is a lot of expectation. And because we are such big fans of the source material, when we set out to write these records that are almost like a companion piece to the original, we feel like it would be like a parody or something disrespectful if we didn't really try our best to make really good material. And of course, you can't please everybody or whatever, but at the end of the day, if Paul Masvidal is doing a solo on our record, and we wrote one of the songs years ago specifically for Sean to play drums on. I'm like, well, if these guys are okay with it, then I can sleep at night.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned Sean, and we have to talk about Sean. Obviously, he was going to play a substantial role in the creation of this album. That obviously did not happen.
Right.
You guys talk about this also I started releasing some behind-the-scene footage and documentary style insights into this whole process, and not only working, getting stamp of approval, having a close friend in Sean, then obviously losing Sean. Is that? I mean, that's another layer of I'm sure pressure as well, but some level of discomfort. Is it hard even for veteran musicians that have gone through it all to open up in that way? Because not every, death metal bands are usually not known for being like, hey, let's just open the door and just talk about our real emotions here. Was that a difficult step to take?
I think it felt like a natural step, because the process demanded it,
Right.
Sean and I were friends, but not like Gus and Sean were. They were like really tight. They were like hey, I heard your mom's sick. How's she doing kind of friends. I was like, hey, I'd see Sean a couple times a year. We'd have a laugh. We'd hang out and blah, blah, blah. But it was, it wasn't as deep. And I thought it'd be really cool just to get his feedback on the material and really have him, produce like the way people used to produce records, where the producer comes to the rehearsal and it's like, hey, this part's really good. Why don't you make this the chorus? Or like, this part's not working like that. And I was really curious to see what his input would be. When I was younger, I was like, I don't want some guy in the room telling me about my songs like that. Now that I'm, less insecure, the idea of having somebody that you trust and respect really giving you quality feedback becomes really valuable, And ironically, I needed feedback a lot more when I was young and insecure, probably, than I do now. So, and that was a big factor in the delay of the album. And I think, I don't want to speak too much for Gus, but, trying to live up to doing a Sean Reinert tribute as a drummer. That's a tall order. And then when he has just passed away and he's a friend of yours, then it becomes really personal. And I think, I think we just kind of didn't really talk about the record for like a year. Because Gus and I have played together plenty, doing Left to Die with Rick and Terry, where we played the old Death stuff, which stemmed out of doing Gruesome. And I think we just kind of we just let it ride, until it was really time to come back to it and to, when it wasn't so raw for him. And, I was happy to procrastinate because, like I said, I felt that there was a lot of pressure on the record. So I was kind of like, oh, well, that's a problem for later. So you just keep, kicking the ball, down the field and hoping that when the time comes, you're going to be able to come up with something. And, so it was a unique record because there was a unique emotional aspect to it. And I think it's important to talk about that kind of stuff because I think, it's weirdly appropriate for entering this era of death because this is when Chuck starts talking about, more psychological stuff and being more in touch or trying to be in touch with, something real and authentic, whether it's, getting mad about other people being fake, like Secret Face, or, or seeing what happens when you don't do that, like Flattening of Emotions. So I feel like it just kind of dovetails into the whole concept of the album in a weird way. And, I know Gus especially worked really hard because he wanted to, to make Sean's memory proud, to do right by it. I mean, he's still really tight with Sean's sister. So, she would tell him if it sucked.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know that there's been teased so far. I don't think that there was a lot of active content about it, but she's part of this documentary series as well, which is cool to see. I mean, there's no doubt about the influence of a band like Death has, the mark they put on extreme metal, but that it's still happening. And, I remember two things recently, not too long ago here in Toronto, we had, Death to All come and play. And
awesome.
Surprising to see how young the crowd was, right? And then another, I don't know, it was like a year ago or something like that. Like I was DJing at a metal event in Toronto, and close to like the later stages of the night, like it's almost time to go home, like kind of wrapping up, and people you see, I remember that a group of people was like, okay, it's well past our bedtime, we're gonna head out, and I just happened just to drop the needle on pull the plug right now, and everybody's like, well, now we have to stay. And these are like much younger people, what is it for you, who has both, gone through this as a fan, but also as a musician and a peer? What's your take on, out of the extreme wealth of death metal bands that did things differently in the 90s and late 80s, 90s, what is it about Death's sound that still today, to people that didn't have the emotional connection with Chuck, right, that weren't even around to really, get tied to that way, what is it that still you think hits that nerve with people?
I mean, I think that it's a bunch of different things, that kind of dovetail really nicely. Part of it, I think, is, when Death was first getting established, outside of the tape trading circles, 87, 88, 89, 90, it was the right time because Possessed had just broken up. So people that were into heavier music, were kind of scrambling. Celtic Frost right. was like doing like opera stuff, and Slayer was slowing down. Even like Sacrifice, Dark Angel, all those bands were kind of moving towards like a pure like thrash sound.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the public had just really digested, Rain and Blood, and so they were ready to hear something crazier.
Right.
And while most of the bands were moving in the opposite direction, and Death was sort of the first of that tape trading circle to really get a record out that was, you could buy it at the mall. Like you'd have a hard time finding like Necrophagia, Season of the Dead at the mall. You'd have to go to like a specialty record store, even though it came out before Scream Bloody Gore. And so they kind of were positioned at a unique time, in the marketplace or whatever. And they had cool artwork. They had a great name. They had a great logo. In addition to having obviously killer material, you know. And so I think it was just when they broke, it was just the right time. And then in terms of they became, like most people, what's the first heavier band they heard in the 80s? It's probably Metallica, right? Depending on where you live, it might be somebody that's closer to home. Maybe if you're in Toronto, you'd hear Exciter or something first. But, and Death became one of those bands for death metal. The first death metal band you heard was probably Death, maybe Morbid Angel, maybe Obituary, maybe Napalm Death or Carcass if it was a little bit later. But that became the first band that you would hear. And that's the stuff that sticks with you, especially when it's good. You know what I mean? It's not like it's the first band you heard and then the next band you heard was way better. It was like, no, this is killer. And it was the first thing I heard was Master of Puppets, and it's a great record. So it's my favorite record because it was the first heavier thing I heard, and it's also objectively good. So Death was, like I said, they were positioned at a great time, and they were making killer records. And then in terms of, people rediscovering death metal in the last, now it's been something like 10 years or whatever, that it's really been a whole thing in the underground. That's kind of one of the first things you think of, like, oh, I want to listen to death metal. What do you hear? You hear Death, you hear Morbid Angel, Carcass, Napalm Death, Obituary. Well, it's the same fucking 5 bands as when I was in high school, but those are the legacy bands that you got to start with. Just like, before that with thrash, everybody was rediscovering Exodus, Overkill, Testament, Nuclear Assault, whatever. But Death is unique because it's Chuck's band. It's not, you know what I mean? It certainly by human, it becomes Chuck and whoever is there.
Right.
It's not like oh, they keep getting a new guitar player every album. It's like, no, this is a totally different band. And then the next album is a totally different band, and so on. So it's really just about his vision. And of course, because he's dead, I think that there's a romance there, because even though he had a pretty significant amount of output before his death, he was still only, what was he, like 33 or something insane when he died? Like, he was in his early 30s. And obviously, as a guy that's, creeping right up to 50, you have a lot, you can still have a lot to fucking say after 33. And so you have this, there's always that tragic thing when the story ends halfway through. It's like, whether it's Hendrix or Randy Rhoads or Cliff Burton, or Chuck or whoever, you think, God, here's this insanely talented, super creative person, and that they could have done even more, especially somebody like Chuck, who, every album was almost like a little mini genre in and of itself. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just really like a huge combination of things, that have just cemented the band as, one of the most important bands in the heavier side of metal, for sure.
In like the early 2010s, like specifically 2012, there were like a bunch of like the old school death metal bands that kind of came back and were reclaiming more of the spotlight that was like given to metalcore and a lot of newer genres. And then all of a sudden, like the last 2-3 years, with probably 2023 as an insanely fantastic year for death metal, like the last couple of years just been this golden age for death metal again, pushing black metal, thrash metal a little bit to the sides again in the extreme metal world. So right now there's all these people discovering not just new bands but also like these classic bands. This is the perfect time for this record as well, I find. Like I think this is a better time for this record, I think, to come out than, for example, in 2019, right after the previous record. I think there's a lot more appetite again for like that old school death metal sound. But then we also know that collectively, the four of you play in, what, 5,000 bands already.
Yeah, several.
So
I don't know, several.
hey, you said like, oh, what I was telling my wife, like, oh, we're gonna do this new project, and it's never gonna play live, maybe once or twice or whatever. This album is really cool. I mean, so far, I think "A Darkened Window" is my favorite song on the
Cool.
album. But
We thought that was the hit.
there's a lot of good stuff on there. What can we keep our eyes open and our fingers crossed for? Like, I guess I'm not going to be the only one that wants to see you on a stage playing this stuff, right? So,
I hope not.
what is possible? What is possible?
We're currently working on some stuff for the States. Before the end of the summer and maybe a little bit more in the fall. And then we're looking to next year to go out and be playing abroad. And, this is more specific for you, but it's now been, 12 years since my drunk driving conviction. So I'm very eligible to get back into Canada, and I'm currently working with a lawyer and a promoter to do it 100% the right way so that I can enter once and then never have any problems again. Even though technically I should be able to get in, I'm sure most Canadian metal fans are pretty familiar with how overzealous the Canadian Border Patrol is about driving convictions.
It happens from time to time that a band shows up one less member for all of a sudden an instrumental set tonight. Stuff like that.
Yeah. After we got turned away twice with Exhumed, I was like, okay. I used to think they just wanted the money for the TRP. You paid $200 to go in. I was like, oh, it's just a scheme to get money. And they're like, no, we don't want, don't come in. I was like, wait, really? I thought you just wanted the $200. Like, I don't give a fuck about that. Don't turn around. It's like, oh shit. So we just stopped coming. But that should be changing very rapidly as well. And Gruesome's no, that's not true. We did one show in Winnipeg. That was the last time I was in Canada. And but yeah, that's all we've ever done in Canada. So I think we're very overdue to get up north. And really, we really do believe in this album. I think it's kind of weird for me because if I'm making a record with Exhumed or whatever, that's my stuff. So right. I listen to it and I'm like, oh, that's cool, but I'm too close to it. Whereas this, I feel like is not my stuff. So I hear it and I'm like, oh, this is actually like kind of a good record. Like, fuck, this is pretty cool. So I think we really believe in it and we want to go out and support the record, and we want to go out and connect with people because, something that's kind of unique with this band, or I guess it's not unique with tribute bands, but it's, unique with a band that writes its own songs, is that ultimately there's nobody in the room if we're playing and they came to see us that doesn't like death. So it's it's kind of a celebratory sort of thing. It's not like a let your hatred out or any of this stuff. It's like, hey man, I love this stuff. You love this stuff. Like we're here just to enjoy that. And there's kind of a I don't there's it's a different emotion, when we play. And one of the things that somebody told me, it's like, what we do and what DTA does and Left to Die is like, it's like every show is almost like a wake for Chuck for people that didn't know him, but we're just fans, so it's right. Like there's an emotional aspect there that's maybe not present at other metal shows.
There you go. On that uplifting and hopeful note, let's wrap it up because first of all, I'm super excited for this album to come out. Like I said, I've had a ton of fun just, having the privilege of, getting early access to albums for interviews and all kind of good stuff. This is one I think that a lot of people are really, really going to appreciate and connect with for all the reasons that you mentioned. And I'll keep my eyes open to see some Canadian announcements, and in the meantime we'll have to come to the States to see you play, but will definitely be worth it. Matt, I know that you're an extremely busy man. I'll probably talk to you soon about other bands
I hope
instead.
so, man. I hope so.
But thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and hope to see you soon on stage.
All right, bud. Always a pleasure, man.
Just out of reach, there you'll remain trapped within your own reflection.
You are awesome for watching this video. Click right here to see more content like it and subscribe to the channel.